Hello, welcome to another tutorial video. This time we're going to be looking at Next to, of course, God, America, I. This is the kind of poem I could make a 2-hour video about, and in fact the first draft I've done of this has gone on for about 40 minutes, so now I'm coming back and doing just a very short one. It's really dense. There's so much to actually think about and discuss, but I'll try and keep it concise. So first of all, we've got this, in the structure we've got, it's mostly one stanza. Now, most of it's there with one additional line where someone is actually commenting and actually passing all this on to us. And that gives us the idea of rambling. Okay, so all of this comes through, very little punctuation all the way through. When I say we've only got the question mark and the dash and the actual apostrophes here and here. And so it just gives the idea that this was just rambling. The second point I want to talk about then is the fact that it's a sonnet. Now, a sonnet is normally used to capture an idea in a very poetic and powerful way. Here, it's being used badly. So the actual sonnet structure works, and it is a sonnet. However, the actual content is not being put across well. So it's an ironic use of the sonnet form to show again that this person doesn't really know what they're talking about. It's rambling, it's bitty, it's put together poorly. So it's mocking the actual speaker through the shape of the poem, because it should be for something so much better. He's attempted to put it in something so grand and glorious like a sonnet, but he's failed miserably because it's full of contradictions and lacks sense. That's giving us an allusion to all these kind of speeches where people try and encourage and justify things to do with war. They say all the right things, but sometimes it just rings hollow, and here it literally rings confused, hollow and nonsensical and contradictory, etc. Third thing I want to talk about then is the lack of punctuation. And the lack of punctuation is really important, because if this person was really genuinely patriotic, the first line would say, next to of course God, America, I love you. So this would be next to of course God, comma, America, comma, and then I love you would be on the next line. But the lack of punctuation here makes it run in an odd way, and that's because the speaker doesn't really know what they're talking about, doesn't really believe it. Second of all, the areas here, God and America, if you really loved God, then I'm sure you would have a capital G and a capital A in referencing it. We could give it some excuse because we're thinking, well, he's just taking down a speech and actually putting it that way. That would be important, but I think this way is, is definitely justifiable. And moreover, the fact that this is the only point that actually has, because there should be loads of full stops in here, the fact that he could, this is the only one where we do have a he, this gives us the idea that this person is really important. So this person is actually giving the speech, and what he's saying is far more important than necessarily what he actually believes that God or America are really indicative of, or actually saying in terms of rules or things to obey. It's him that actually has the power here, denoted by the punctuation. Again, that's another reading that you could use. So we look then at the meaning. Now, one of the main meanings that comes across, the first thing actually that will come across is the one I put second here, is the idea of patriotism, the idea that the love of one's country, love of one's soldiers, and what the love of one's soldiers and what they do, etc., is a great thing. So here we have the quotation from, a little section from the American national anthem. Here they're called, the sons are actually acclaimed to the glorious name. Here we actually have them record to the heroic happy, like lions, and it talks about liberty and freedom, etc. And it talks about them all in a very foolish way, an ill thought out way. But at the same time, there are those shades of patriotism. That's what it's trying to do. Now, it fails in that miserably, and what we end up with is a piece of propaganda, a piece of confused propaganda. This is something being said to inspire, to cajole, to encourage, but it fails miserably in doing so. And what we're left with is the ultimate contradiction in trying to espouse something that A, you know nothing about, and B, isn't true. There isn't perhaps the glory and the wonder, etc., that this person is referring to. At least they don't believe it. To say that there isn't some glory in war and there isn't some glory in war would be wrong. But here, what Cummings is really referring to is the fact that this person doesn't know what they're talking about. And unfortunately for us, because of the capital he, we can imagine it's someone important. And the fact they're actually giving a speech in the first place shows again that it's probably, again, someone important giving it. And the fact that someone actually took the time to note it down, and the way that they've actually noted it down, is very factual. These are exact words he said, that's why he spoke, and then he drank a glass of water. So we've got that image or that feeling that this person is who's speaking is important. Perhaps then, because they're commenting on the war, a politician of some kind, and then it just kind of gives us the idea of the propaganda that governments give us in so many different ways. There's also the meaning of war. The idea of war comes through, and the theme of war comes through by the loss that's there, and by the inferred or insinuated efforts of the soldiers. And obviously they're only going to die, and they're only going to go rush to a roaring slaughter on the battlefield, etc. So we have the ideas of war and the effects of war in that part there. Images. We move on then to looking at, normally I would focus like this one here on just situations in the poem. So here you have the heroic happy dead, that ironic image, oxymoronic image of the heroic happy. I mean, if you're dead, how do you know anything about being happy, etc.? And how do you express being happy? This is a very warped other person's opinion on it, obviously very slanted. Normally we kind of just look at that and obviously just pick that one out. But the one we need to think about more here is two things that are just images that we get from reading the poem as a whole. So with this idea of the triad of the speaker, the situation, and the recorder, how is this coming across to us? What do you see? Do you see someone proud, banging on a podium, really pushing themselves, really pushing their point, really glorifying, saying this with full zest and belief, and a load of people listening to it? Or do you see someone just practicing in front of a mirror, and then there's an attendant or an aide or a receptionist, just kind of noting down exactly what happened as a report for someone else, maybe making sure that this person's towing the government line, for example. How does it come across to you? Is the recorder, is the recorder higher up than the person, or is the recorder lower up than the person? If you try and visualize this whole poem, just the situation, before you take any of the words, it becomes a real fascinating, multi-leveled image that you can reassess and re-put in so many ways. Does this person believe what they're saying? Is this person being forced? Is it a practice run? All those ideas come through. And again, with that same imagining of a scene or scenario here, we've got the drinking. Is this, is he drinking rapidly here because he's, so het up by what he's saying that he's charged and he just needs to cool and calm himself down? Or is he, trying to just bide some time because he knows what he said was rubbish? Or is he trying to literally wash the crap he's saying out of his mouth? There's so many different ways of actually looking at it, and credit to Cummings for making it so ambiguous for us. It's a real pleasure to actually discuss. So we look then at the language. The first thing I want to pick out, and you get several of these, is the techniques used, classic techniques. We've got the a strange illusion here where we actually join all these words into one phrase, and that just makes it seem like, again, the person's using a phrase that they've heard and they don't really know what they're talking about. We've got the alliteration of heroic happy, which makes it stick in our heads, but also that's an oxymoron, which actually just makes the contradiction and fallacy in what he's saying become more evident. We've got the rush and roaring used in the same line to give us this real grand sense of sound and life. Ironically, just after we talk about the happy dead, this grand sense of life, and also we've got this rushed like lions, the similes used to actually give us the idea. The similes used to kind of give us an idea of the bravery of these people, but they're heading to a slaughter, so it's not that brave if that was kind of guaranteed. And lastly, we've got the we've got the rhetorical question that's being put out as some kind of really powerful thing to think about, but in this case, shall then the voice of liberty be mute, is actually just a complete contradiction to everything he said, because those voices are mute because they're dead, and this voice here may as well be mute because it's not actually said anything. However, another way of looking at it is that this is the voice of liberty left, or they died for this voice of liberty. So then you question, was it worth dying to hear this nonsense? So you can look at it in so many ways. We've got then the phrases taken from other pieces, etc., or other ideas, cliches almost. So we've got the part from the American national anthem there, and we've also got "Acclaim Your Glorious Name." That's in several hymns and I'd say sonnets, hymns and psalms, etc. It's reflected. And here, the voice of liberty, again a very grandiose phrase, etc. that's used, and here it's nonsensical, etc. And land of the pilgrims, a reference again to the to America. But even if it's just referencing America in this, it just happens that the writer was American, but this can be just supplanted and pasted to so many different times and ideologies. It's really, really relevant to our time as well, with all the mediated stuff we hear. Like take for example the Iraq war recently, when we were told of the definite weapons of mass destruction that were there for so long in so many different ways. We were guaranteed them, and then when the troops were actually there, they found the inspectors were there, we found nothing. So it's interesting to just the feeling what we're actually shown and what's actually true, and how many different sound bites you actually pick up. I'm sure there's a website somewhere where you can actually look at different speeches, and if you kind of tally up the different techniques, etc., used, perhaps to be used in your own writing as well, you'll actually see that there are a lot of stock phrases, stock ideas actually repeated. So yeah, that's phrases. Now, probably the most important one, the most complex one, is the idea of sound and silence that actually comes through in the language. So we have here obviously the deaf and the dumb. We also have the roaring, and then we have the voice, and we have the mute, and we have the fact that this person's speaking at all. So there's several references there to sound and silence. And one way of looking into this, although not directly obvious at first, is to think about it in terms of not necessarily who's speaking, but the value of what's being said. What does the silence say in this poem, and what does the sound say in this poem? Because the sounds that we have here are really empty vessels. There's a lot of nonsense coming through. But the silence that we actually have here says a lot more. Would it have been better if this person hadn't said anything, if hadn't been the voice of liberty here? And when we actually have just the dead in themselves, that's a far more fitting testimony to bravery and to trying to stand for what you're believing and doing the right thing and being patriotic than anything that's actually said here. So there's several different levels you can go into that, and actually, as I mentioned earlier, that's why I got into such a long tirade earlier, some propaganda for myself actually, when I did the first version of this. So I'm going to stop at that, but try and actually think about how far and how much you can analyze it. Again, it's one of those where if you understood the basic concept, then it should really give you encouragement and confidence to actually build that further. But I'll stop at that for now.